First of all, I would like to greet to all of you. Good afternoon. And firstly, I would like to really to thank the organization of this conference to allow me to participate it actively with my speech. And I would also like to thank all the speakers for their interesting presentations. So I would like to share my screen to give you my own view for presenting my speech. So as already mentioned, my topic is called entitled Reload Reactualization Practice as Traditional Renovation. Um, the status of interpretation practice within Western music culture lies on the musical text and historical basis. Both the theorist Jürgen Stenzel and with his In Search of a History of Music Interpretation and Hermann Danuser in Execution, Interpretation, Performance argues that the score, as central ways of performing it, generates specific patterns and common agreement among the community and the performers. So we have the score and the performers. In and it's represent the totality of techniques, rules, habits that mediate between the musical text and its sounding result. They define the historical context around the music artworks then. Once they become recurring through the history of perform practice, they become and generate tradition, what we used to say tradition, so historical establishments. The musicologist and viola gamba player Loris Dreyfus formalized a proper regime of authorities which guide us through the interpretation process in order to validate our actual performances and interpretations. I would like to summarize those into three different steps or grades. I call grade zero those regime of authorities which are directly connected with the original artworks. They concern the composer, create the musical artwork, but also the musical score, where the composer thoughts is represented. And finally, the transmission of the composer intentions, which comes from teachers or music director, which had a direct contact with the author or the composition itself. Musicians and performers so leads us to differentiate another grade of authorities transmission, which are not directly connected with the performance or the score itself. And then musicians in this sense are those professional identities which mediate through their performance practice. It means that specific knowledge does not directly come from the composer anymore. They arise instead directly from the field of the performance, given us to superiors or older or more expert musicians, for example. But they also might come from the what we call generally the tradition, which is a prevalent ways of interpretation or from distributed common senses among the artistic community. The last the last grade of authorities that we can achieve is that which I call grade two, as represented by the musicological theorist and theory which rely upon the analysis of interpretation styles, major performances, but also recording, and of course the analysis of the score. Although they refer to the performer or performances or even score, here the theoretical knowledge fuels the original one. So we as receivers do not have the direct contact with the original score anymore or to the original composer. The system of authority somehow guarantees us that we are doing the right thing. We are doing something that can be passed through the generation and preserve also the knowledge for future generations. So, in this sense, authorities can be seen as a kind of artistic tool and historical tool for knowledge and to gain new knowledge and new awareness about the composition and the performances. But at the same time, they might restrict the room of our creativity. It's a kind of a cage, a creativity cage. And so some questions to me arise, especially how to rethink the interpretation practice toward new and crafty approaches, and then how to generate new performative solution to that. To do so, my purpose in these contributions aim to reflect on the reactualization practice as a possible tool to reshape the concept of interpretation. And my starting point is the musical artwork, and especially the dichotomy, the historical dichotomy between the original artwork and its reproductions. For example, in within the visual arts, creative approaches offer different proposal to this topic as the ready-made approaches, especially the clear example is LHOOQ and its multiple versions by Marshall Duchamp. And this idea of multiples leads us also to conceptualize also the artwork as an open score, as the Italian philosopher Umberto Eco suggests. If we think that the artwork is a kind of wide horizon of potentials that be continuously re-explored, also every process of interpretations and its reproduction can also be modifiers somehow of the original artwork. That's the reason why Umberto Eco speaks about work in movement. And especially those two approaches rely upon one specific thing, as I already explained, the idea and the concept of multiple and multiple performances that reflects the original one. Um, what I offer here is not aimed to question the music artwork itself, underline some semantic limitation of the score, rather than questioning the creative potentials of the performance to generate new creative solutions. In fact, what I'm looking for is what the performer can do. Hearing is the performer, the object under control. Through the process of actualization, I reflect on a circular movement between appropriation, the original score, the original performances, and its own regeneration. So, what Echo suggests the possibility of re-explore the original work, what we used to call the original work. Therefore, this process of reinterpretation also asks to create new meanings. Of course, this process requires to um, explain and to augment our authorship inside that performance, of course, and then once again the idea of re-exploring. And this idea of re-exploration as the can be the key concept to uncover potentialities that original scores may allow. To do so, I developed a case study based on those theories and especially on one specific score by the Italian composer Bruno Maderna called Serenata per un satellite. I would like to briefly show you here the score. As you see, is I call this a graphically pitch notated open score. Why? Because the center are the notes, the written notes, but rather than in all the performance and in the score itself, the composers allow the musician or the musicians, because it can be performed as a solo piece but also an ensemble piece, freedom to readapt, reconceptualize, and re-perform the pieces the performance, the piece through the different performances, leaving the parameters, the performing parameters, completely open. The only restriction are the notes. In fact, the main concept here is his concept of improvisation, but with imperative, improvising, but the written notes. What does it mean? Does it mean that Maderna asks us as a performer to readapt, recollect all our performative insights, but leaving the notes as they are? To do so, I try to recreate my own performance starting from the concept of extemporary performance. What does it mean? Improvisation somehow achieved from historical sources, especially from the violin concerto, lead me out to discover that modern concept of improvisation as extemporary strategies of performing. Somehow, for people with most knowledge about that, we can see modern references in Bach conductions, or somehow some little references on Cobra by John Zorn, for example. And hearing the authorities guide me to this kind of process, because the second historical thing that I wanted to take care into my reactualization practice is the ambivalent relationship that Maderna had in its own aesthetical interest, which is the relationship between performance and electronics, in which sense Maderna used to use the electronic as a meta or virtual performer. And to do so, my reference for that is Musica su due dimensioni for solo flute and magnetic tape. So, um, another important thing to reconsider in that is what Maderna asks is the score might allow is kind of augmented chamber music. And what I did actually into my exploration of this case study. Under these aspects, for example, I would like to offer, so finally, through my own experience as a performer, so as a main reference, and through also the historical information, my actualization process, which I call Madonna Reloaded for electric guitarist and random electronics. Here, the idea of random is a sort of specific meaning to me. In fact, I I differentiate three different levels of that in my case studies. I started from the concept, the performative concept, and historical concept of Maderna on improvisations. According to Musica su due dimensioni and the idea of importing this bivalence and this dual relationship between performer and computer or electronics, I recreate a virtual ecosystem through the new technologies, and especially through MaxMaxP. And then finally, I was able to define somehow a kind of self-generative performance. So the case studies and is based on the translation of all the performative parameters that are expressed in the score into programming language to recreate my virtual environment or virtual ecosystem. So what relies upon the interpretation practice, such as the melodies are written, the articulations, dynamics, timbre, symbols, extra musical notation, but also the concept of chamber music, pitches, tempo, length, and speed are being reconverted into my own max MSP patch or jitter patch through specific names of objects or algorithm that are able to be connected and to translate into this new environment. So the connections between all these parameters and their translation define what is the result, the performative result of my case study. About that, So what's was the original score? Nowadays, it seems it's appear completely different because everything has been reconverted into a max patch. If you see the minutes, the length, which and also different virtual performance that operates in there, and everything. So this score has been entirely transcoded into max MSP environment. And this is my first case study in which I developed, or the first attempt of possible reproductions of Moderna piece, in which I used to play with myself and improvise with myself pre-recorded. And the key concept here is the translation of the improvisation into programming language using the random modes and other specific objects that produce random articulation speeds. What I would like to show you is a second possible version, which is still kind of open. This time, I recreated this acoustic environment into visuals. And to do that, I uploaded and I reconverted the piece once again for as a performative video installation. I would like to show you just few seconds of it. I skip a bit. The main concept here is a completely self-generative performance in which um, I, as a pre-recorded performer, generate a totally auto-sufficient uh, meta performance of myself, able to reproduce the composition itself. And to give a little a partial conclusion of that is the thing that although I tried to reconvert and retranslate the the original concept and the original idea of Moderna, it's this piece allowed me also, and through the system of authorities and also what Umberto Eco suggested, I was able to recreate my own interpretation practice differentiated from the original one. Indeed, finally, the only thing that remained stable there was only the written notes. But for the rest, I tried to readapt in a totally different way my own performance. Thanks so much for your attention.